Hey, what's up, everybody? You've probably heard the stories about Jeremy Dewitte working in the mall, selling cell phones at a kiosk back in 2002, 2003, or whatever. Of course, you've probably heard Jeremy's side of the story where he says he was actually working undercover. People want to know the truth. What is the truth about Jeremy Dewitte working at the mall? Was he really selling cell phones? And what all transpired there? Well, I can tell you. It is correct. Jeremy Dewitte was working at a mall in Central Florida back in the early 2000s selling cell phones, cell phone flip phones, selling the plans with nights and weekends and limited daytime minutes with unlimited texting. He was hawking these Motorola flip phones and these Nokia phones and Qualcomm, where he would get paid a base hourly rate of something like $9 an hour, and then he would get commissions for every cell phone that he sold. And he did relatively well for it, and he sold a lot of cell phones, but it wasn't exciting enough for him. So when he told people about what he was doing, he made up a lie saying that he was working undercover at the mall, busting thieves that were either doing cellular phone hacking type theft, cloning, or other stuff at the mall, like he's a security guard that's undercover. But the fact of the matter is, he would stand in front of one of those kiosks that are in the middle of the mall, and when people would walk by, he'd try to start conversations with them, be like, "Hey, you got the new Motorola? You got the new Motorola? Come over here," and people would ignore him for the most part, But at one point, there was this girl that worked at the mall, and she would always walk by, and he would try to talk to her, and I can tell you, Jeremy Dewitte fell in love with her. He was swooning for her, he was lusting after her, but she wasn't giving him the attention that he wanted. He would conveniently show up in line behind her to buy a pretzel, or he would see her going over to Orange Julius to get a drink, and he would show up in line behind her. She was kind of trying to ignore him as a creepy guy, but then one day for Jeremy, tragedy struck. The woman that he was in love with that wouldn't even give him the time of day decided she was going to move back with her family in Lebanon. And she did, basically, without even saying goodbye to Jeremy, this guy who's been creeping on her. So when Jeremy found that out, he was devastated. He had to find a way in his mind that he could go to Lebanon to confess his love for her and win back the love of his life, a woman who wanted nothing to do with him. And so he conceived of a plan, which he actually had already been conceiving of, but he started to execute the plan where he was going to buy a identity, because he was a felon, so he can't travel out of the country. But if he was someone else, then he could. And so he started impersonating one of his best friends, his roommate, Brett Solomon, who Jeremy told him, "I'll give you $3,000 if you sign your name and get it notarized and give me your ID and let me get an ID with your picture on it and pretend that I'm you." And Brett thought, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Brett ended up being arrested and questioned by Homeland Security and now has a legal felonious case that will haunt his name forever, and totally regrets doing this with Jeremy, allowing Jeremy to take over his identity. But that's what Jeremy did. And by the way, Jeremy literally stole his identity because Jeremy never paid him the money that he said he was going to pay him in order to steal his identity. But that's neither here or there. Jeremy claims it was because he was arrested and he never got around to paying because he was sent to prison, in jail. So anyway, Jeremy got this guy's ID, started enacting and being him, so even started working a job as security saying that he was Brett, which is actually how he got caught, because a cop that knew Jeremy looked at his ID and said, "You're not Brett, you're Jeremy Dewitte." But again, that's neither here nor there. This girl in Lebanon that Jeremy Dewitte fell in love with, he got his aunt, who worked at the airline, to coordinate the trip. So Jeremy Dewitte flew from Florida to London, England, and then took a connecting flight to Lebanon because he wanted to profess his love for this woman who will remain anonymous. And he showed up in Lebanon at this girl's door, surprise, surprise, and she was not thrilled. She's like, "What are you doing here, John?" And he's like, "I'm Jeremy." And she's like, "Jeremy, whatever your name is." And right then and there, she broke his heart. So sadly and unfortunately, Jeremy Dewitte came back from that with a broken heart, and he went to a bar and met a girl. Of course, he had a fake ID, and so he thought it would be better to prey on like a teenage girl instead, somebody that would be more naive and less likely to say no to him. You guys all know that story. But that effectively ended his days of working at the mall and a cell phone kiosk and stalking other employees in the mall across the world. Of course, he eventually got arrested, and he had to deal with Homeland Security and the Department of Justice and the FBI question him, why are you going to the Middle East? Because that was shortly after September 11th attacks in 2001. They found out his whole plan for the fake ID and stuff, and they indicted him for that, and he got in big, big trouble. And this all started with his obsession and boredom of sitting at the mall trying to pitch cell phones and just becoming obsessed with this woman who would walk by every day. And he was like, oh, drooling, telling himself she's so beautiful, and effectively falling in love with a woman that he's never even connected with. Maybe his stories of working undercover at the mall are really a cover, a mask that he wears because he was basically being a stalker and a creeper and secretly researching and following people that worked at the mall. Now, we know about this woman from Lebanon. Are there more? I don't know, probably. Of course, Jeremy will never tell you that he stalked a woman all the way over to Lebanon, got his heart broken, and had to come home empty-handed and a broken man. So what he'll say is that he was actually working as a U.S. contractor with the military for a private company doing unnamed things at unknown times, and that's why he was in the Middle East for 10 days. And then he'll conflate that with the story that he met his wife in Egypt when he was over working for the military contractors, private companies, whoever, in the Middle East. Of course, that's false too. He did bring his wife back from Egypt, but that's when they went together. They were already married. They went to Egypt on vacation, and then he came back with her instead of coming back separately. That's the only truth to that story, because Rania grew up, his wife Rania grew up in Egypt, and then she met a man over there, a significantly older man, by the way, who grew up next door to her, and that man married Rania and brought her over to the United States because he already had U.S. citizenship. So he brought her over and made her a U.S. citizen. But then years later, they got divorced, and Rania moved back to Egypt temporarily before coming back to the United States and meeting and marrying Jeremy Dewitte. And she thought he was an upstanding citizen, a cop, a respectable human being. And she had already been married. She already had access to the United States. Jeremy didn't do any of that for her. Jeremy's just left his wife Rania high and dry in a similar way to how he feels that the love of his life left him high and dry at the doorstep in Lebanon. And he had to come back empty-handed and have to tell his friends what had happened. So he's made up this story that he's some military contractor, and he delved into this fantasy that he's been holding on to ever since. Is it possible the whole Jeremy Dewitte derangement syndrome comes from heartbreak? Perhaps there's something more from the early years, back in the 90s, the 1990s. Something happened to Jeremy Dewitte's heart which threw him for a loop forever. It probably has to do with his mother and his father. What say you? If you'd like to know more about that, let me know, and maybe I'll make a video on it. I hope you enjoyed this video explaining a little bit of Jeremy Dewitte's cell phone career, which turned into a whole creeper, stalker, stolen valor thing. And now he's in jail again. So thanks for watching PoliceTube. I appreciate you. And as always, have yourself a great day.